Ma'am, that is not a real service animal. Look at it. It doesn't even have a proper vest. Those were the words that echoed through Gate 14 at Denver International Airport, loud enough that half the terminal turned to look. I stood there frozen, one hand wrapped around my rolling suitcase, the other resting on the harness of my golden retriever, Scout, who sat perfectly still beside me the way he'd been trained to do since he was 8 weeks old. The woman shouting at me wasn't a stranger. She was Deborah Whitfield, my HOA board president, the same woman who'd spent the last 2 years leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door about my mailbox flag being the wrong shade of red. And now, 3,000 miles from our cul-de-sac, she was standing in front of a packed gate, pointing at my medical alert dog like he was a stray she'd caught digging through her trash. I need everyone here to know, she announced to the gathering crowd, that this woman is committing federal fraud. I've seen dogs like this one on the news. People buy vests online for $10 and pretend their pets are service animals so they don't have to pay pet fees. A gate agent was already walking toward us. My heart was pounding. Scout, sensing my stress spike, pressed his body gently against my leg, his trained response to keep me grounded before a seizure could take hold. What Deborah didn't know was that this wasn't our first confrontation. And it wouldn't be our last. But by the time our plane pushed back from that gate, she wouldn't be on it. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I tell true stories about the people who think rules only apply to everyone else, and what happens when karma finally catches up with them. This one involves a homeowners association gone wild, a medical alert dog who saved my life more than once, and an airport meltdown that ended with security escorting the wrong person off a plane. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks they run the world because they own a laminated binder full of community guidelines, you are going to love this one. Make sure you're subscribed, drop a like if you've ever had a run-in with your own version of an HOA Karen, and stick around, because this story has a twist at 30,000 feet that I promise you didn't see coming. Let's get into it. 3 years ago, my life looked a lot different. I was diagnosed with a seizure disorder in my late 20s, the kind that comes with almost no warning. One minute I'd be making coffee, the next I'd wake up on my kitchen floor with no memory of the 20 minutes in between. My neurologist explained that medication would help control most of it, but there was no guarantee, and living alone meant I was one bad episode away from real danger. That's when my sister suggested a psychiatric service dog, one trained specifically to detect the subtle scent and behavioral changes that happen right before a seizure. I was skeptical at first. I pictured something out of a movie, a dog wearing sunglasses and doing tricks. What I got instead was Scout. Scout came to me at 18 months old, already trained by a non-profit organization that specializes in medical alert dogs. He was calm, quiet, and impossibly gentle for an 80-pound golden retriever. Within his first month with me, he alerted me to a seizure 11 minutes before it happened, enough time for me to sit down safely, call my sister, and avoid what could have been a very bad fall down my basement stairs. Scout wasn't just a pet. He was medical equipment with a heartbeat. He came everywhere with me, the grocery store, my job, restaurants, and eventually, every flight I took to see my family in Ohio. I settled into a quiet townhouse in a well-kept community outside Denver. The neighborhood was pretty, the neighbors were friendly enough, and for the first year, life was calm. I had my routine, work from home 3 days a week, therapy on Tuesdays, and long walks with Scout every evening along the community's little walking path lined with maple trees. I thought I'd found the peaceful, stable life I needed. Then Deborah Whitfield got elected HOA president. Deborah moved into the neighborhood about a year after I did, and within 6 months, she had somehow talked her way into the HOA presidency after the previous president, mysteriously, decided not to run for re-election. I later found out Deborah had gone door to door promising people she'd finally enforce the rules that keep this neighborhood classy. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you know exactly the type. Deborah was in her early 60s, always dressed like she was about to host a charity luncheon, and she treated the community guidelines binder like it was the United States Constitution. She measured grass height with an actual ruler. She once sent a certified letter to a family because their inflatable Halloween pumpkin was, in her words, aesthetically inconsistent with the fall color palette outlined in section 4.2. But Deborah reserved a special kind of scrutiny for me. I don't know if it was because I worked from home and she resented seeing my car in the driveway during the day, or because she genuinely didn't understand invisible disabilities, but almost immediately, she zeroed in on Scout. It started small. A note on my door asking me to confirm registration of my pet with the HOA, even though service animals are federally exempt from pet policies and pet fees under the Fair Housing Act. I explained this to her politely at our first encounter, standing on my own porch with Scout sitting calmly beside me. That's what everyone says now, she told me, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. Everyone's dog is suddenly a service animal. It's very convenient. I remember my stomach twisting. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but hearing it from someone who was supposed to represent my own community stung differently. He's a medical alert dog, I said. He's trained to detect when I'm about to have a seizure. I have documentation if you. I don't need your medical history, she snapped, cutting me off. I just need this neighborhood to follow the rules. That was the moment I realized Deborah wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in control. The real trouble started a few weeks later, at our quarterly HOA meeting. I hadn't planned on attending, but Deborah had placed an agenda item titled Unregistered Pets and Liability Concerns, and a neighbor texted me a photo of it with a laughing emoji, because everyone on the street knew exactly who that item was about. I went to the meeting to defend myself, sitting in a folding chair in the clubhouse with about 30 other residents. Deborah stood at the podium in front of a poster board. She had actually made a poster board, outlining safety risks posed by unverified service animals, complete with a stock photo of a snarling dog that looked nothing like Scout. I've done research, she told the room, and legally, we are allowed to request documentation for any animal claiming service status. That's actually not true. Under the ADA, businesses and housing associations can only ask two questions: is the dog required because of a disability, and what task is it trained to perform? They cannot demand paperwork, certification, or medical records. I said as much, calmly, citing the law. Deborah's face went red. Well, I think common sense should apply here too, she said. For all we know, that dog could bite someone. It could have fleas. It could be a liability for this whole community. A few neighbors murmured in support of me. One older gentleman, Mr. Alvarez, who lived 2 doors down, stood up and said Scout had never so much as barked at his cat in the 2 years we'd lived there. But Deborah wasn't looking for the truth. She was looking for a win. The board ultimately declined to pass any new verification policy, since it would have violated federal law and opened the HOA to a lawsuit. Deborah lost that battle in the room. But I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't done. She just needed a new angle. About a month later, strange things started happening. First, it was small. Scout's spare service vest, the one I kept clipped to a hook by our front door for quick trips to the mailbox, went missing. I searched everywhere, assumed I'd misplaced it, and ordered a replacement. Then, the folder I kept in a label bin in my hallway closet, the one with copies of Scout's training certification and my neurologist's letter, wasn't in its usual spot. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd moved it during spring cleaning. Then came the real gut punch. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to fly to Ohio for my niece's christening, I discovered that my original printed documentation, the specific letter airlines request for medical alert animals, had vanished from my file folder entirely. Not lost. Not misplaced. Gone, while the folder itself sat exactly where I'd left it. I don't scare easily, but that shook me. Someone had been in my house, or at least in the areas where I kept Scout's paperwork accessible, like the porch bin where mail sometimes sat, or possibly even inside during a maintenance visit I hadn't fully supervised. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Priya, over the fence one evening while walking Scout. You don't think? She started, then stopped herself. Think what? Deborah's been asking a lot of people about you, Priya said carefully. She asked me last week if I'd ever actually seen your dog do anything. Like, an actual task. She's been going around collecting what she calls witness statements. That was the moment the pieces started clicking into place. Deborah wasn't just annoyed by my dog. She was building a case. I'm not a confrontational person by nature, but I am a very organized one, and years of managing a chronic illness had taught me to document everything. If Deborah wanted to play games with my paperwork, I decided I was going to play a smarter game. Step 1. I called my medical alert dog organization and requested certified digital copies of everything: training records, task documentation, my neurologist's letter, stored in triplicate. One copy in a locked cloud folder, one printed and kept in a fireproof lockbox at my sister's house, and one saved directly to my phone. Step 2. I installed a small battery-powered camera on my porch, angled to cover the mailbox, the bin by the door, and part of the walkway. It was disguised as a solar garden light, cheap, easy to install, $30 on Amazon. Step 3. I quietly asked my HOA-appointed maintenance contact whether Deborah had requested access to my unit for any reason. He confirmed that as board president, she technically had a master key for emergency inspections, though she was supposed to give 48 hours notice and only enter common utility areas, never personal spaces, without explicit permission. That detail mattered more than I initially realized. 3 days after installing the camera, I got a notification on my phone. Motion detected, 2:14 p.m., while I was at a doctor's appointment with Scout. I opened the footage with my hands shaking slightly. There she was. Deborah Whitfield, in a lavender cardigan, letting herself onto my porch with a key. She glanced around, clearly checking if anyone was watching, then opened the small mail bin where I sometimes left outgoing mail and Scout's spare vest when I forgot to bring it inside. She lifted the vest, examined it, and slid it into her oversized tote bag. Then she peeled back the flap of a manila envelope sitting on top, the one containing a printed copy of Scout's task documentation that I'd left out to scan later that week, and took that too. I sat there staring at my phone screen, stunned. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't bad luck. My HOA president had been stealing my service dog's paperwork to build a case that he was fake. I saved the footage in 4 separate places before I even finished processing what I just watched. I didn't confront Deborah right away. Partly because I needed time to think clearly, and partly because I wanted to see how far she'd take it. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, a mass email went out to the entire HOA distribution list, 62 households, from Deborah's official board account. The subject line read, Community Safety Advisory, Unverified Animal in Our Neighborhood. The email claimed, without naming me directly but obviously referring to me, that a resident had been repeatedly unable to produce valid documentation for a dog posing as a service animal, and that residents should use discretion around this animal. She cited concerned witness reports and hinted at a possible HOA vote to restrict pet access to common areas until the matter was resolved. I felt sick reading it. This wasn't just petty anymore. She was actively trying to isolate me from my own community, using my missing paperwork she had personally stolen, as evidence that I didn't have it. That's when I decided it was time to fight back with facts. I requested an emergency spot on the agenda for the next HOA meeting, citing a matter involving board conduct and possible theft. Deborah, not realizing what was coming, approved it herself, probably assuming I'd show up flustered and unprepared, easy to steamroll in front of the room like last time. I showed up with a laptop, a projector adapter, and copies of the porch camera footage burned onto a flash drive. The clubhouse was packed that night. Word travels fast in a neighborhood with a very active group chat, and everyone wanted to see how this would play out. Deborah opened the meeting with her usual authority, running through minor business before finally reaching my agenda item. All right, she said, barely masking her smugness, I believe we have an update regarding the service animal situation. We do, I said, standing and connecting my laptop to the projector. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. On the 14th, I installed a security camera on my own porch after noticing that documents related to my medical alert dog had gone missing from my home over several weeks. I want to show you what that camera recorded. I hit play. The room went dead silent as the footage rolled, Deborah letting herself onto my porch, glancing around nervously, opening the mail bin, taking the vest, taking the documentation envelope. 30 seconds of crystal clear, time-stamped video. Someone in the back gasped audibly. Mr. Alvarez muttered, "Are you kidding me?" loud enough for half the room to hear. Priya, sitting near the front, covered her mouth with her hand. A ripple of whispers spread across the folding chairs. Deborah's face went white, then blotchy red. That's a total misunderstanding. I had concerns about the area being clean. I was doing a routine. You entered my property without the 48-hour notice required by HOA bylaws, took private medical documentation belonging to me, and then used the absence of that same documentation to accuse me of fraud in an email sent to 62 households, I said. I have copies of both. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Someone called out, "That's insane, Deborah." Another neighbor stood up and said he was done paying dues to fund a personal vendetta. The board's vice president, visibly uncomfortable, asked to see the footage again, then quietly requested Deborah step outside so the board could discuss next steps. I'd never seen someone's authority evaporate that fast in real time. But the confrontation everyone would really be talking about hadn't even happened yet. Deborah didn't go quietly. 2 weeks later, ironically, we ended up on the same flight, not by coincidence, but because it turned out Deborah's daughter lived in the same Ohio suburb my sister did, and Deborah had booked a trip to visit her grandkids on the exact same connecting flight out of Denver. I didn't even notice her in the check-in line at first. Scout and I went through the usual process, TSA screening, which service dogs handle without needing to be separated from their handler in most cases, and boarding at gate 14. That's when I heard her voice behind me at the gate. "Well, isn't this convenient?" Deborah said loudly, drawing eyes from nearby passengers. "Still dragging that dog around, I see." I tried to ignore her, hoping she'd let it go after the humiliation of the HOA meeting. She didn't. Instead, emboldened by an audience of strangers who didn't know our history, she launched into a full performance. That's the scene you heard at the very beginning of this video, Deborah loudly declaring my service dog fake in front of the entire gate, insisting I was committing federal fraud, trying to rally other passengers against me. "I've reported this exact situation to their HOA," she announced to no one in particular, as if that gave her authority here too. "This woman fakes documentation. I've seen it myself." A gate agent, alerted by the commotion, walked over. "Ma'am," she said to Deborah, "is there a problem?" "Yes," Deborah said triumphantly. "That woman's service animal isn't legitimate, and I don't think she should be allowed to board with it." The gate agent turned to me calmly. "Airline staff are trained specifically for this. Under the Air Carrier Access Act, they're only permitted to ask the same 2 questions the ADA allows. Ma'am, is your dog a service animal required because of a disability, and what task is he trained to perform?" "Yes," I said. "He's trained to alert me to oncoming seizures." That's all that was legally required. The gate agent nodded, satisfied, and thanked me. Then she turned to Deborah. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and stop interfering with another passenger's boarding process." Deborah, riding high on her own outrage, made the worst decision of the entire trip. "I am not going to be quiet," she snapped at the gate agent. "This is a safety issue. I've been dealing with this woman's fraud for months, and I have witnesses." "Ma'am, I need you to step back from the boarding area," the agent said firmly. Deborah didn't step back. She stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward me, raising her voice even louder, now accusing the gate agent of enabling fraud, too. A second staff member arrived. Then a uniformed airport officer. What happened next felt almost too perfect to be real, but I have it on video, because at that point 3 different strangers around the gate had already pulled out their phones to record the scene. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to lower your voice and back away from the gate area," the officer said. "I have every right to speak up about safety concerns." Deborah shouted. "You do not have the right to harass another passenger or interfere with boarding procedures," the officer replied. "This is your final warning." Deborah, apparently believing her HOA presidency carried weight at 30,000 feet, made a fatal mistake. She reached out and grabbed my arm as I tried to step past her toward the jet bridge, saying, "Don't you walk away from me, I'm not done." That was it. Grabbing another passenger is exactly the kind of physical escalation that gets you removed from an airport, HOA president or not. 2 officers stepped in immediately. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." "What?" "No, I have a flight to catch, my daughter is waiting, this is completely." "You assaulted another passenger and refused multiple verbal warnings from airline staff," one officer said. "You will not be boarding this flight." The look on Deborah's face as they walked her away from the gate, past dozens of passengers who had just watched the entire meltdown unfold, several still recording, was something I don't think I'll ever forget. Somewhere between disbelief and humiliation, the exact expression she'd worn at every HOA meeting when someone dared to disagree with her, except this time, there was no clipboard to hide behind. The gate agent turned to me and said quietly, "I'm very sorry about that, ma'am. You and your dog are welcome to board whenever you're ready." Scout, completely unbothered by the chaos, simply stood, gave his tail one calm wag, and walked beside me down the jet bridge like nothing had happened at all. By the time I landed in Ohio, one of the strangers at the gate had already posted the video online. It spread fast, first through a local Denver subreddit, then picked up by a few regional news accounts covering airport meltdown stories. Within 2 days, it had over 4 million views. Back home, the HOA held an emergency board meeting less than a week later. Deborah did not attend. She had, apparently, already resigned via email the night the video went viral, citing personal reasons and harassment from residents. Given what everyone had watched with their own eyes, first at the clubhouse meeting, then at the airport, nobody in the neighborhood group chat was exactly heartbroken. The board formally apologized to me in writing, adopted a new policy explicitly protecting residents' rights under the Fair Housing Act regarding assistance animals, and, maybe my favorite detail, added a specific bylaw prohibiting board members from entering resident properties without written consent, closing the loophole Deborah had exploited. Mr. Alvarez started a small neighborhood tradition after that, every year on the anniversary of the meeting, as everyone started calling it, residents leave dog treats in Scout's mailbox. Priya jokes that Scout is now more popular in the HOA than any human board member has ever been. As for Deborah, last I heard, she moved out of the neighborhood entirely about 4 months later. I don't know where she landed, and honestly, I don't spend much time thinking about it. Scout still walks that same maple-lined path every evening, minus the anxiety of wondering what note might be waiting on my door. Here's what this whole ordeal taught me. People like Deborah aren't actually interested in rules, or safety, or fairness. They're interested in control, and they'll bend, break, or completely ignore rules the second those rules stop working in their favor. The same woman who lectured me about following the guidelines, broke federal housing law, committed theft, and physically assaulted a stranger, all while insisting she was the one protecting the community. But here's the other lesson, the one that matters more. You don't have to match that kind of chaos with chaos of your own. I never once raised my voice at Deborah. I didn't need to. I documented everything, I knew the actual law better than she did, and I let facts do what shouting never could. Scout didn't need to bark or growl to prove himself either, he just kept doing exactly what he was trained to do, calm and steady, while everything around him fell apart. Whether it's an HOA, a workplace, or a random stranger at an airport gate, the people who scream the loudest about rules are often the ones with the least respect for them. Stay calm, keep your paperwork straight, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. So that's the story of how my HOA president accused my service dog of being fake, and ended up getting escorted off a flight for it instead. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with your own version of an HOA Karen, whether it was at home, at work, or even somewhere as random as an airport gate? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of your stories are even wilder than mine. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe for more true stories about karma catching up with people who think the rules don't apply to them, and I'll see you in the next video.